as I believe every intelligent person should, I do believe in the existence of extraterrestrial life out there, because we live in a small galaxy, and there are so many other galaxies, and not to agree to the fact that there must be some other form of intelligence and that they would like to get in touch with us is really narrow-minded, in my opinion. What Diana Pasuka did for me, it is that she reframed, what a UFO experience could be. And then I realized, my goodness, I had experiences all my life. I just didn't see a spaceship landing, because all of my academic research and also my passion is spiritual experience. And in this way, I would consider myself definitely an experiencer, because I had, whether you call it a spiritual experience or paranormal or transpersonal, like John Mack in his famous book Abductions, he talks about transpersonal experience, right? I had many of those, and some of them, but I'm not claiming that they are, and I hope you help me to actually figure it out, would definitely fit into what UFO experience could be, according to Diana Pasuka. I had many experiences that are considered spiritual and or paranormal that could be not associated probably with UFOs, but then there are other category of experiences that could be associated with UFOs. A third space is also called the liminal space. Liminal, it means in between realities. And, the more I looked, the more I saw. So it's quite interesting, because once you give yourself the permission, it's almost like something happens in our brains, and we do not allow ourselves this permission to talk about it. Because everybody in my family experience the paranormal, especially when family members were dying. Mm-hmm. Right? Because this is what the third space is. I just want to stress, it is completely real. It is just not completely material. And in a modern way of viewing things, we assume that it has to be completely material to be completely real. I studied at the Center for Medieval Studies, which was actually in a wing, actually, of the Pontifical Institute, which is a Vatican organization within the Center of Medieval Studies at the University of Toronto, which everything was very spiritual. So the universe was perceived like one big fountain, the consciousness comes out of the one, Plotinus said, the one, like God, and then it just falls like a fountain into different beings and eventually returns back to the one, which is a beautiful image, right?
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
Welcome one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure, meeting the moment. My name is Mike, an active UAP field investigator here in Southern California, with my co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
Reverend Stu, it's wonderful to see you again. How is it going today?
It's great, Mike. It's always great to see you. I love doing these shows with you. I'm very excited about the guest today. It's a friend of mine.
I am as well. Before we get to that, I want to say real quickly, though, thank you very much to all of the listeners and subscribers out there. We're a new show. We just launched a little bit ago, and we already have a very, very impressive number of subscribers that's growing every day. And, thank you, and please do continue helping us, promote these conversations across the world, because it's very important stuff. But with that, today we will be speaking with Dr. Joanna Kujawa, PhD, and is the author of The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddess of Eros, and Secret Knowledge, scholar and spiritual detective. Her current book in progress that she's going to be talking about with us for the first time ever publicly is about UAPs, UFOs, and their relationship to esoteric traditions. So we're really excited to have an exclusive conversation with Dr. Kujawa about that. She received her BA and MA from the Pontifical Institute for Medieval Studies at the University of Toronto, Canada, and her PhD from Monash University, Melbourne, Australia. And as an active academic for over 20 years, she uses her scholarly training to investigate topics that other academics often pass over. So I would consider that a maverick, and definitely welcome mavericks to the show to help sort of forge a new path with this conversation. Stuart, you know Dr. Kujawa, correct?
Yeah, she's associated with one of our top universities here. I've attended some of her lectures and learnt a lot from her. She's just absolutely fascinating. And one of the things I really love and appreciate and respect about her is she's very open-hearted. She's literally sharing her own spiritual journey with us, and it's really informed my spiritual journey. Very grateful to her.
That's amazing. So I can't wait. Let's just bring her in, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Joanna Kujawa. Dr. Kujawa, welcome to Universal Disclosure. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here and to speak about this new topic in my research and in my new book.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. So we, for anyone who's listened to or watched other episodes, we do have a little bit of a tradition where we start out by asking our guests what your favorite music song or musical artist is. So, Dr. Joanna, you have a favorite song, or maybe even more than one?
Yes, definitely. So it is a bit of a surprise question, I must say, and I'm going to date myself, but I would say that probably something by Dire Straits, the group from the UK. Maybe there was one, I think Spanish Nights or something, just it's this beautiful kind of love song. And then you're going to laugh. It is Blondie's Atomic Night.
Oh, fantastic.
And Eurythmics, There Must Be an Angel in Your Room.
Beautiful, beautiful.
It is a beautiful song, yeah.
Wow, that's great.
And also The Miracle of Love. So I guess very romantic, I don't know.
Nice. Yeah, well, that's definitely a theme there.
Yeah.
But yeah, as Stuart and I are musicians, that's how we met, and we like to just sort of break the ice with everybody that way. And it gives us, I don't know, just, I don't know why we do it. We just do.
Yeah, that's
Nice.
good. And you know what? When we are talking about it, anything by Janis Joplin. I like
nice.
Janis Joplin, yes.
Excellent. I'd love a Mercedes-Benz, right?
Oh, yeah, it's a good song. And Summer also.
So just, I guess, maybe we sort of get right down to it, if you don't mind. And I'm curious, what triggered your interest in UFOs?
Okay. What triggered my interest in UFOs? It's actually a very interesting question because, first of all, I have to say that as I believe every intelligent person should, I do believe in the existence of extraterrestrial life out there because we live in a small galaxy, and there are so many other galaxies, and not to agree to the fact that there must be some other form of intelligence and that they would like to get in touch with us is really narrow-minded, in my opinion. So I always believed that, although I must say that I never thought that I had any experiences, which we later can discuss if you want to, because I perceive the UFO phenomenon as something that you look at the sky and you see a spaceship, which I really cannot claim that I saw anything like that. Or, the spaceship lands somewhere and you interact maybe with different beings. And it never happened to me like that. So it wasn't until actually I read Professor Diana Pasuka's book, The American Cosmic, which is a fantastic book. And this is how actually I and Rev Stu met online because we were big fans and we were following her on Facebook when she was still available on Facebook. And, we were joking, with her, actually, she was very open and writing to her basically on Facebook. So what she did for me, what Diana Pasuka did for me, it is that she reframed, what a UFO experience could be. And then I realized, my goodness, I had experiences all my life. I just didn't see a spaceship landing, so to speak. And if you want, we can cover it a little bit later, because all of my academic research and also my passion is spiritual experience. And in this way, I would consider myself definitely an experiencer, because I had, whether you call it a spiritual experience or paranormal or transpersonal, like John Mack in his famous book, Abductions, he talks about transpersonal experience, right? I had many of those, and some of them, but I'm not claiming that they are, and I hope you help me to actually figure it out, would definitely fit into what UFO experience could be, according to Diana Pasuka. Another thing that really helped me to talk about it, to think about it, to reframe it, is another book by another academic from actually Texas, Rice University, Professor Jeff Kripal, who in his book, Secret Body, it's a fantastic book, but because he is such a deep thinker, he's not as well known as he should be, in UFO circles, because he is so deep and he goes more into the inner aspect of a UFO experience. So he has so many examples from famous scholars, and famous scientists who had experience of encounters, UFO encounters, that also from a perspective of more of an inner experience, or rather some kind of anomalous experience, rather, I saw a spaceship, that it also helped me to basically research this topic. And as I was researching this topic, I thought, oh my goodness, I think something was going on in my life as well, and that's it. So, because I consider myself also a spiritual seeker, I had many experiences that are considered spiritual or paranormal, that could be not associated probably with UFOs, but then there are other category of experiences that could be associated with UFOs. And then I decided basically to explore this as a researcher, and also to look into my own experiences and try to somehow define them. Because you probably agree that our reality is so rich. We have so many bizarre experiences in our lives, and we just don't talk about them because they seem to be too weird, right? And we don't know how to frame them. And to whom we would talk about it, maybe to my mother or my husband, but really not publicly normally, right? And then somebody gives you a framework, and this is what Diana Pasuka gave me. She gave me a framework, and then more so also Jeff Kripal, to think about these experiences and actually redefine them for myself as well.
Wow. I just want to make a comment then, and an observation. These academics, like Dr. Kripal, Dr. Pasuka, and your good self, are sharing and informing us all. And your openness and willingness to talk on these topics allows us to explore the same topics. And I really want to honor and respect you for that, Dr. Joanna. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And actually, I was really amazed at Diana Pasuka's work, and I started to be in contact with her via email occasionally, and also express the same gratitude, because without her, I wouldn't be able to talk about it, because I didn't have a framework for it. Also, her book, American Cosmic, is just so well written. Right. Yeah. So this is just like a story of adventure as well. So she's also a fantastic writer. Even if you are not interested in UFOs, it's a great book to read. So and especially when we talk about Jeff Kripal, he looks into these experiences the way I look, which is basically as a third space. The third space is also called the liminal space. Liminal, it means in between realities. So in my research and experience, the UFO experiences and also other spiritual experiences belong to the sphere of the liminal, which is in between realities. They are more like multidimensional experiences. And that helps me to define this in a more precise way. Or some people call it the imaginal. So I learned this word imaginal, which is from French actually imaginal, from Jean-Yves Leloup, who is a translator of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and actually writes a lot about Gnostic Gospels. So this is what we have in common with Rev Stu also. And then he mentioned that actually, and in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is my expertise in a way, and I wrote a book about it as well, is he talks Mary Magdalene actually converses with Jesus after the event of crucifixion in this space, in this liminal space. And when we look at it from other perspective, the liminal space or the imaginal or the multidimensional space in a kind of more modern language is the space where the most interesting, although most difficult to define, things actually happen, whether they're spiritual or UFOs. It depends really on a perspective.
Yeah, that links perfectly into Jungian perspectives on the unconscious, which I find absolutely fascinating.
Yes, yes. And I love Jung as well. I love Jung as well because he was one of the few psychoanalysts and psychologists who actually look into the spiritual and look into the anomalous, and he had many experiences himself. So that's why he actually had to look into it, because like me, he had to deal with having this kind of experiences. And then how do you frame it?
Yeah, I think anyone who has an experience, whether it's with what we would call ET or something also esoteric like spiritual or ghosts or whatnot, it's hard to put into perspective. And one of our other guests had mentioned that, you know, if it's something like that happens to you, you know, just kind of go with it, but there's no easy answers. And it's you know, the brave folks like yourself who are coming forward to sort of make this even an acceptable conversation to have, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I decided, and you know, the more I looked, the more I saw. So it's quite interesting, you know, because once you give yourself the permission, it's almost like something happens in our brains, and we do not allow ourselves this permission to talk about it. So if you want me to, because you asked me also to discuss my spiritual journey, maybe I first cover those experiences on my spiritual journey and then how it led me actually to these other experiences, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yes. So I was born in communist Poland, and I was brought up in a Catholic family. And I know that this is not a popular thing to say, but I have no bad experiences with the Catholic Church. You know, on the contrary, they always nurtured me. You know, I always got scholarships to study philosophy, and you know. So I have no complaints. So I have no bad experiences that other people talk about, although I respect that, of course, you know, they happen and people had them. So what took me away from being a Catholic, it is not that I had a problem with the church at that stage, but because I decided or felt that it didn't give me any spiritual nourishment, that it was kind of, you know, rituals, basically, you know, confined to rituals. And what I was looking at was a real experience. And what I was looking for was a real experience. And what I met was dogma. You know, the dogma, this is how it is. It's really well organized. You know, it's kind of clear in a way. You know, this is when you do this, but this is when you do that. But didn't give me any spiritual experience. And I thought, and it didn't really deepen my spiritual understanding. But, you know, I have to admit that being born into a Catholic family, it also opened me up paradoxically into a spiritual experience or paranormal experience, because everybody in my family experienced the paranormal, especially when family members were dying. Mm-hmm. Right. So they were communicating with us as they were passing. And in fact, it still happens to me. For example, a man who was my kind of adopted father was dying during in 2021. And when I was sitting in meditation, he came to me in my meditation and basically asked me, I want to exit, but I see so many exits, which one I should take?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I told him, take the one, and I just spontaneously said it, not that I have some knowledge which exit you should take. Take the one that has light on it, in it. And then he went through. And then a couple of hours, maybe 6 hours later, because of a time difference, my mother is in Poland and I am in Brisbane, Australia, called me that he died. And this kind of experiences happen to me all the time. So, for example, when my beloved grandmother was dying, she told me, I'm going to come and visit you after death. And I thought, oh, thank you, right? Because I was a young girl and, I felt like I don't really want to have any ghosts, in my room. But one day I woke up in the middle of the night. I was in my room in Lublin, which was my hometown then. And my grandmother was sitting on the edge of her bed, but she was more like an outline. And I just basically sat up and then she just dissolved. So there's one thing. Another one, which is much more serious experience, which is probably in the realm of paranormal. I'm talking about these experiences at the moment only. It is that when I was already living in Toronto, Canada, because I'm also a Canadian citizen, and I was married to my first husband, we conceived a child, but it was only like a few weeks. And at night, I was dreaming that my mother is a grandmother, the same grandmother, is sitting in a big room, empty room, on a one single chair, like a regular chair, and she's sitting in a chair. And I asked her, Granny or Nana, why are you sitting there? And she answered me, and this is really spooky because there is a physical evidence. She says, I'm waiting for your baby. And I woke up and I had a miscarriage.
Oh my God.
And I learned that I had a miscarriage. So, there are elements like that. And just maybe one more. When I was finishing my PhD and I was living off a scholarship, I was renting a room in in Melbourne from an older man. And I was sleeping, and I have lots of lucid dreams like that. So lucid, it means that I am dreaming that I'm in the room that I actually am. Right? So this is the same room. It's exactly the same situation. And I see, so that's why the question pops up, is it a dream? Right? Because everything is the same. It's not this dreamy thing. It is just, I'm not fully conscious, but I'm actually there. And I saw a shadow above the ceiling, and the shadow looked like confused. And the shadow telepathically asked me, where is he? And I said, oh, he's in a different room. And I had a sense, oh, this shadow is not looking for me. He's looking for Rob. It was the name of the man. And then the man got a heart attack.
Whoa.
Wow.
So and I directed him, but I was not to him because I knew that he was looking for him, not for me. But also I was not, it's a little bit like in alien abductions. I could communicate telepathically, but I had no choice about lying or telling the truth. You know what I mean? It's like he got into my head and he asked, where is he? And I said, he's in this other room. So I had many experiences like that, of paranormal. And also when eventually I left Catholicism and I started to study esoteric Hinduism, before I even got into Gnostic Gospels. And I was initiated to a kind of ancient and legitimate tantric tradition, Kashmir Shaivism, which is a form of esoteric Hinduism, and a legitimate tantric tradition. I went for a formal initiation. And during this initiation, which happens, there were like over 100 people there, and there was the teacher or the guru in this tradition. There's a ancient ritual that they perform with chanting and anointing and so on, but it's actually quite simple in a sense that you meditate and he comes up and puts a finger on here in between your eyebrows to basically awake your Kundalini energy. And what happened to me, I had a very strong awakening because I actually started to feel the energy, of which I actually just had something in yoga classes, okay? Like I had no idea what it was actually. because I was focusing on theoretical teachings of associated with consciousness and so on. And Kundalini was something that I just heard of, And I started to feel the Kundalini movement. And what happened after that is that I started first to cry, uncontrollably cry. Then I started to uncontrollably laugh, which was quite a performance. I wouldn't do it publicly if it was in my control. But what was much more interesting, that first I actually had the experience of the whole space of the room collapsing into like a one point, like collapsing on me, and then expanding into it, almost like infinitely. And suddenly I was like in space.
Wow.
The room just was suddenly, I don't know, a million times bigger. And then it collapsed back to a normal size. So it's almost like the space around me folded. So that was one experience. And then, if you don't mind me mentioning it, I actually had a tantric experience during an intimate relationship with a man, when I felt again, it was a second time, the movement of the Kundalini energy, which this time I felt it was an intelligent energy, very ancient, that was like me, that was also so much bigger than me. But it was me, except it like me in some kind of multi-dimensional space, wise and older, and I'm just a small fragment of it moving through me. It kind of blasted in my heart, and then I physically lit up like a bulb.
Wow.
My partner was like, what's going on? Fortunately, he's a spiritual man, but like I actually physically lit up, and I was immobilized. Like this started to happen to me, and then it moved into my forehead, and I saw like was trying to make up its mind what's next, like it intelligently was trying to make a choice, and it moved in one direction. And then I had like an experience of cosmic consciousness. Everything was just particles around me, and it lasted for a long time. So I was actually quite dysfunctional for many weeks, because like reality was just like particles of light. And, I had to finish my PhD at that time, and it was very, you can understand, difficult to focus, because, I was trying just to like find myself in material space. So I think this is a good preamble to these other experiences, because later, actually just very recently, when I was reading John Mack's Abduction, his famous book, he actually says that people he hypnotized, and he hypnotized 67 people who claim to be abductees, previously to the abductee experience or parallel to the abductee experience, they had all kinds of experiences that were either paranormal or spiritual. So their consciousness was already open. Uh-huh. And I think this is often omitted, and this is what I'm trying to cover in the book that I'm writing at the moment, because often there are questions that I ask myself as well when I'm just kind of vaguely interested, in ETs and so on. How come, there are sightings and some people see them and some people don't see them?
Yeah.
And my answer to this is some people are open to it, and they already have extrasensory kind of ability because of spiritual experiences or maybe religious upbringing, which in my case, I am really grateful to actually Catholic Church, but it was allowed, because it was allowed in a Catholic family, it is allowed to talk about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and I was already open to this. But some people, the same when you go to this initiation, the tantric initiation, which is people get wrong ideas, the teacher touches you on top of your forehead with his finger. Some people have no experiences. And they say, nothing happened. I'm so disappointed. And, and I had this huge experience because I think you're already kind of opened. You already allowed for this possibility. Not that I was, and I must tell you that I really had no idea what the initiation was about. I just basically signed up for this. I went in like my yoga Lululemon, yoga pants and yoga shirt, because I thought it's probably some yoga thing, right? And I was like into yoga then. And then when I saw, oh, no, everybody's like dressed in saris. And I said, okay, right. And we meditate. Okay, I was already a meditator. And this happened. And I think this happened because something in me was already ready for this. And because I already had somehow the ability to perceive something that is not necessarily 100% material, even if it is 100% real, because this is what the third space is. I just want to stress, it is completely real. It is just not completely material. And in a modern way of viewing things, we assume that it has to be completely material to be completely real. And this is a very new worldview, actually, when you look at it as a philosopher.
Yeah, that material reductionist view that's come out of the age of reason since that time. Yeah, and in fact, I wondered if some of these anomalous activities present themselves as mechanical so that we'll accept them because we're primed to only accept mechanical devices.
Absolutely, and this is what Diana Pasuka is also arguing in American Cosmic, that this is what it is. And you mentioned Carl Jung before, the Swiss psychoanalyst, who also had many experiences himself. They both say that basically UFO is a mechanical angel. This is what actually Jung called it, a mechanical angel. Because as you perhaps remember from my bio, I studied at the Center for Medieval Studies, which was actually in a wing actually of the Pontifical Institute, which is a Vatican organization within the Center of Medieval Studies at the University of Toronto. So I'm kind of feeling guilty because I'm really a prodigal daughter for the church, because they really took good care of me and gave me lots of scholarships. And when I was studying medieval studies, medieval age, and also ancient age, I realized that the paradigms were very different. We live in a very much materialistic paradigm. And for example, in the antiquity, even before the Middle Ages, it was a Neoplatonist world, which everything was very spiritual. So the universe was perceived like one big fountain, the consciousness comes out of the one, Plotinus said, the one, like God, and then it just falls like a fountain into different beings and eventually returns back to the one, which is a beautiful image, right?
Wow, love it.
Then it's gorgeous, eh? And then in the Middle Ages, everything became about Christendom. So it had to be all spiritual, but also it had to be related somehow to the Bible and the teachings of, as they understood the teachings of Jesus, right? Which I think that understanding was quite limited. However, and this worldview is not any worse than the one we have at the moment, which is really just materialistic, physical point of view, except that in the 12th century, it became very dogmatic. So I'm not sure if you're aware of the Cathars, because we're writing about Mary Magdalene in The Other Goddess. Some people believe that she eventually went to France. So I looked into this. There was this heretical group called the Cathars, which was a Gnostic group who believed that Mary Magdalene was also a teacher and a partner, Jesus's partner. They were persecuted by the Holy Inquisition created by the Catholic Church. So the Holy Inquisition was created in the 12th century, first of all, to persecute and prosecute the Cathars. And then, anybody, the witches, it just grew and grew, right? So the problem with this worldview is, the only problem with this, it is not that it was spiritual, not that it was about Christianity, but because it became so dogmatic that if you have a different point of view, then you're a heretic, and we can kill you. You can burn you at stake, and it's for your own good. That's the way of thinking.
Now, the irony of this situation, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is I would argue that the Catholic Church is a type of secret society because they have approximately 50 miles of books and publications of a spiritual nature underneath the Vatican. So they're not sticking to the one text, the Bible. They're exploring far and wide.
I know, and I'm beating myself up because, as you know, at the end of Pasuka's book, The American Cosmic, she talks about going to the Vatican Library, and I thought, my goodness, if I stayed because they wanted me to stay, I would have access to this, but I just, decided, I want to have spiritual experiences. I want to be a writer, and I rejected the final scholarship.
Oh, wow.
So I would have, because they would have sent me to Vatican, right? Because I was doing so well. So I was a kind of a darling that disappointed everybody in a way, because I decided I also wanted to be an artist and a writer, and I was young and I wanted to have a life, and I thought I don't know if I want to spend the rest of my life reading manuscripts, right? So but I do agree with you that but there are many interesting things going on. So I don't, in anything that I write in my new book, and also the other book, The Other Goddess, I don't put anything in black and white. I say this is the possibility, because I'm focusing on the third space, and I think this is the key also to the UFO experiences. So I do agree with you, but I think there's another irony of modern science, that now if something is not materialistic, you're just an idiot, you're just a bogan, you're just a redneck, right? And it's interesting because actually Rupert Sheldrake writes about it. He says according to modern science, if you cannot touch it, you cannot bite it, pretty much, right? It doesn't exist. And anybody, for thousands of years of our civilization, everybody would be like the great scientists, including great scientists of past ages. They would be like, what? Right? This is a crazy point of view. The starting point should be consciousness, right? Not the material, because you perceive it through your consciousness. Even if material is separate from consciousness, which it may or may not, getting philosophical, you still perceive it through your consciousness, right? So how can you discredit? Also, modern science has no idea where consciousness came from. So they are already, closing this door. And then Tobias Cherton, who is a writer on Gnosticism, he's a British writer on Gnosticism and a scholar, many books published. He says that can I give a rude example? He says that modern science is a little bit like a giant cow. It means they go into space, they see a new planet, and in the Middle Ages you will say, oh, what a beautiful example of God's creation. I wonder if some spirits live there. They just say, is there methane there? Is it like CO2 there? So he says it is a little bit like a giant cow full of methane. This is what they see. They don't see the beauty of creation. They don't see the intelligence that is there. And they criticize the medieval point of view, but actually I read something recently that the planets have a particular vibration and give out particular sound, right? Scientifically speaking, we know that. When they landed on the moon too, it kind of was like a bell, they say, right? Like it gave a sound as a bell. And medieval theologians, were saying that exactly that each planet gives out a different sound, and it's like a cosmic melody of creation.
Music of the spheres.
Music of the spheres, fantastic, right? So they were right, you see.
Well, it was interesting. What you said before about consciousness is supported by the observer effect in quantum mechanics. The fact that the outcome is different depending on whether the experiment is being observed or not observed. I find that fascinating.
Yes, this is exactly that. So this is a fantastic example for consciousness. And I think that if anybody is closest to spiritual science, it is the modern day physicists, not the Newtonian physicists, but quantum physicists and so on, because they see these anomalies, right, in science, and very often they become spiritual through science. And many examples that Jeff Kripal gives in his book come from actually biochemists and scientists and so on. So can I just offer you one example from Jeff Kripal's book, because it's a fantastic example.
Sure, yeah.
Please.
so I think his name is Kerry Mullis, who got a Nobel Prize for biochemistry. And he had a cabin, just like in the communion, right? He had a cabin in the forest. I don't remember which state. I think it was some eastern states of America, but I'm not sure. And where they went with the family for holidays and weekends. And one evening, it's a fantastic example. One evening, it was around 10 o'clock, I believe, in the evening, he had to go to the outhouse, right? Because it was a kind of simple cabin. And as he was approaching the outhouse, a raccoon, he calls it a glowing raccoon, that looked more like a hologram of a raccoon than a real raccoon, said to him in English, "Good evening, Professor." And he said, like, this was such a ridiculous, mind-blowing, not only a raccoon spoke to him, and he was not on drugs, just so he was not drunk. But, he had a sense that it was more of a holographic representation of an animal that usually, you can find in this area. And that would be funny in itself, except that he disappeared for several hours. He has no recollection where he was. And in early morning hours, he found himself on the kind of gravel road leading to the cabin, having no idea what has happened to him.
Wow.
So, talking about, it's not necessarily a spaceship, it's more like a multi-dimensional communication. And I think that doesn't mean that it do not exist. Quite on the contrary, they may communicate. I think most evolved species would communicate via technology of consciousness with us. Not only, they may communicate through spaceships as well, but I think it is somehow connected with consciousness. Not only that, eventually he gathered up his courage and spoke about it to his adult daughter, who then confessed that the similar thing happened to her as well when she was in the cabin.
Whoa. Now, there's in these encounter accounts, there are animals that come up. One of them is definitely the owl, you're probably aware of, the deer. Now, imagine there's some sort of archetypal layer to that animal. I'm not sure what it is, but I find it very interesting.
Yeah, I find it very interesting too, and it probably would be good to consult, Native American elder or somebody like that. So if you don't mind, I can perhaps move to my own experiences from that could be.
I was most interested in that. But just real quick, I want to throw in here that it is a theme of, when people have these kind of encounters that they will see animals. And it's, I don't know that anyone really knows the answer, but it's sort of postulated that it depends on the person. Like one person might see a deer, another might see a raccoon, but that's potentially because of their makeup or their belief system or what they're comfortable with, in a way. Just wanted to put that out there.
That's a very good point. And I'll tell you, because we're talking about Middle Ages, so I think you're familiar probably with Hildegard of Bingen, who was a scientist, 12th century scientist and a saint in a Catholic church. She was an amazing woman because she was a scientist. She was a abbess, she was running a nunnery, and she amazing intelligence. So she was publishing works of science, but also, on angels. And she actually said that angels present themselves to us in a way that is acceptable to us. And she says they have no one form. Whatever is acceptable to you, they will come to give you guidance. Right? So they communicate with you in a form that is acceptable for you.
Mechanical angel.
So, and now I think we're just experiencing mechanical angels because we are so, technologically minded, right? But she says they will present themselves, so whether it's in the form of an animal or a being of light or, ET, right? Or a spaceship or an orb, because spaceship, it's most of the time, it's the orb. Lots of people experience the orbs of lights, right? Mm-hmm. So this is this communication. So perhaps we are talking about one and the same thing, angels and extraterrestrials, but because we are so mechanically minded, we see them as ETs. When people in the Middle Ages would see them as orbs or angels. So actually, this brings
okay, that's perfect. I wanted to ask you exactly that. I didn't mean to cut you off, but what is there anything like in the middle? And I do want to get back to your own personal stories too. But is there anything in like the medieval times that, if you were to tell us about right now, that would make me think you're talking about ET?
Yeah. Okay, so actually, I think Jacques Vallée is probably Passport to Magonia is probably the best authority there, because anything that I have learned about it actually comes from him, because the whole book, his book is basically a catalog of what happened in the past that could be ET experiences. So maybe I'll share two that I found really, really funny. So one of them is, I think, 1227 Japan, medieval Japan. And interestingly, there is a big war going on. So they are on a field waiting for a battle. And I'm saying interestingly because modern day UFO sightings often happen near nuclear, right, sites. So there's a kind of warrior energy there. And the generals and all the armies saw these big orbs on the sky flying over the armies. The whole like armada of white orbs.
Oh, wow.
And one of the generals, I don't remember his name, but because he was scientifically minded, and it's funny, when we speak about science, because it shows you how wrong they could be, he basically consulted the, scientists from his age. What could it be? Because he has never seen anything like that. There's this armada of what we would call UFOs flying around, like spaceships flying around. And the scientists were deliberating, and then came back with this answer that these orbs on the sky must have been stars which were moved by wind. And that's why they were moving with such big speed. There must have been huge wind in the sky somewhere, and that's why they were like moving with huge speed, So this was that scientific explanation for this. Not a swamp gas, what we are getting, but, stars were moving, really quickly because there must have been some wind, in the sky. And another example is from the 1500s in Germany, Tübingen, when I think it was the 3rd of December, 1557 or something, but around that time, when the whole town observed, exactly like spaceships, which is basically like orbs, lights. And they said it was really strange because they looked like tall hats on the sky, except that they're moving with great speed. Tall hats, right? And it was also considered an omen very often because it often had to do with war times. It's almost like a warning, like they were coming and saying, this is not a good idea, people, right? Don't go there. So they considered it an omen. Another example is from the 1st century, it's Saint Anthony, who lived in the Egyptian desert, and basically a description of a small being, like what we would call gray nowadays, came up to him, and they started to converse. But I think that by the time it was recorded, Catholic dogma got into this already, because apparently the little being was convincing Saint Anthony not to go to Alexandria, where the heretics that do not support the church live.
I see.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if they use the narrative from Saint Anthony to, brainwash us, or maybe the being, really meant it. I don't know. But there was definitely an encounter with a short being that didn't look human, but was humanoid, that conversed with Saint Anthony. So this is in his hagiography. So these are the examples that I found personally interesting.
Yeah, those are. And I think it's also interesting where the one you talked about, how the scientist was sort of explaining it away, the stars blowing in the wind. And in part, I think that's because we just want to, obviously we want to understand it, but we want it to fit into our little boxes. And we don't want to necessarily challenge ourselves sometimes to push, the envelope, as it were, of explanations and whatnot.
That's right. And then we don't want to go outside of this materialistic paradigm. So, for example, when my husband, who is an American and a former New Yorker, as a child saw a UFO flying over New York, and then I asked his mother what was it. My mother says, "Oh, they explained it. It was a swamp gas." Right? So, and he says, "There's no way." He says, even then, although he was a little boy, he looked at his mother like, "What?" You know. It was not it was, it was like a flying cigar with a huge speed and different colors. It was changing colors as it was moving.
Wow.
Oh, wow. John Lennon saw UFOs over New York. There's a video of him talking about it on YouTube and even mentions it in one of his songs.
Oh, really?
I have not heard about that one. I'll have to look it up.
Yeah.
What song?
Strange Days Indeed is the title of the song, appropriately.
I didn't make the connection either, so it's interesting.
It's interesting what you said, Dr. Joanna, about the lights turning up during adversarial engagement, because I mentioned in another previous podcast that we've done about the Foo Fighters turning up during World War II. Very well known.
Very well known incident as well. So there is something to do with this, because some people are so afraid of UFOs, right? And I'm not saying that everybody is good and everybody is bad, because even in religious terms, there are like demons and angels. And it could be the same with ETs, so to speak, right? Some are good, some are here to guide us, some are to, manipulate us. I mean, look what's going on in the world right now. Somebody is doing something, right? And I don't think it's just us. I don't want to get too big conspiratorial, but it things that even heads of nations look like puppets. And I don't think it's just a military-industrial complex or something. I think the complex is actually manipulated by something else. So there are all kinds of, good and bad, so to speak, entities that are somehow involved, and they have always been involved, in this, in being here, right? So that in itself is also interesting. So I think that we have to just open up, basically, and face reality. For me, it's facing the reality of it.
Yeah, I find the accounts from the past of interactions with angels and demons very interesting, and I wonder if that was just an earlier lens through history that the same phenomena was being viewed through.
Yes, I definitely. Well, I don't know if I would put it this way, but I would put it in another way, that it is the same thing that we are experiencing, but our paradigm is different, right? Our paradigm is scientific, mechanistical, engineering kind of paradigm. That's why there's lots of obsession about, re-engineering stuff, and I'm sure they did. Especially in Silicon Valley, because in a recent interview, Diana Pasuka said that she spoke with Jacques Vallée recently, and she asked him, do you think that, they got in the Silicon Valley, they got all of this technology from, somewhere else? And he very enigmatically answered, there are many secrets in the Silicon Valley. He didn't tell her, but yes, right? So I think that both phenomena are real, the mechanical one and the consciousness one. But I think that the more evolved species would use consciousness to move through space and time and to communicate with other species, because honestly, it saves time, and they may be actually a natural way of communicating for them, right? They do not have to be exactly the same as we are.
Very interesting. Well, that leads me to another question I wanted to ask you. Have you ever been asked by anyone from aerospace, the military, the intelligence community, or anyone have you been consulted on these issues?
I've never been, because this is my first public appearance talking about it. So nobody knows that, as far as anybody publicly knows, I wrote a book about Mary Magdalene, okay, and Tantra. So this is first time I talk about it publicly. I'm happy for, to open a dialogue, but nobody did, because nobody knows. This is the first time I speak about it publicly. Right?
Wow, we're honored.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
So on that note, you wanted to can you go into a little bit about your experiences that could have been potentially ET in nature?
Okay, so I'll start maybe with, no, actually, before I start, can I set up the picture here?
Absolutely.
Right? First. So as I started to write this book in January, right? And a few days ago, maybe a week ago, I went back to the manuscript and I decided I like to start my book with something personal, right? So people readers relate to you. So it's not just facts and and so on. So I wanted to start it with a kind of personal anecdote, completely true. We are little girls in school, myself and my friend I'm still in Poland at that stage, right? Communist Poland, Iwonka. And Iwonka has a family in a countryside outside of our hometown called Lublin, which is in the eastern part of Poland, near Ukraine and Belarus. And one day she runs up the stairs. I lived on the 9th floor with my mother, and she lived on the 7th floor of the same apartment building. And she says, "You will not believe, my mother, father, I, and my sister Anya were driving from Stashin, which is a village next to our hometown, and we saw these flying orbs." And I thought, wow, and we went on a balcony. It was early summer, I remember, because we were dressed in summer dresses and so on. And we started to look, at the sky, but we didn't see anything. But then next week, because she had a family there, they went there and it happened again. Wow. And she started to share it in school. Fortunately, nobody was mean to her, but people were kind of saying, "Oh, you saw Star Wars too often," or, you have a vivid imagination. And poor Iwonka, I was supporting her, but nobody believed her, and I wanted to see it, but, I didn't see it. And so I went back to my manuscript about a week ago, and I'm drinking before I did it, actually, I was drinking coffee with my husband early in the morning. And then this voice in my head said, "Check if there were any sightings in Poland." So I basically got up from my coffee, went to this room, which is my home office, and I typed UFO sightings in Poland, Googling. And guess what happened? Can I screen share something?
Oh, wow. Yes, please.
Okay, just let me find screen share. So it was early summer 1978. I know because we're just watching Star Wars and so on, right? And so that morning, when here in Brisbane, Australia, I was drinking coffee with my husband early in the morning, and I thought about this anecdote that I put in my book about my friend Iwonka, and that she had sightings, and that people were kind of jokingly making fun of her, but nothing mean, just everybody liked her, so she was not bullied or anything. And as I was drinking this coffee here in Brisbane with my husband, I heard this voice in my head: check if there were any sightings in Poland. Not even at that time, just check it. And I just dropped my coffee, left my coffee, went to this room in which I am right now and Googled UFO sightings in Poland. And guess what? 1978, the same year, the same summer, major UFO sighting 20 miles away from my hometown.
Wow.
Wow.
It's called Emilcin sighting. And even when I Google again, because I nearly fainted when I was reading it, because it kind of gives credibility after all of these decades to my friend, it is out of 10, if you Google it, it's the 8th most famous UFO sighting. Except that, it happened in the communist era in Poland. But it's Rodwell is 1 and this one is 8.
Wow.
Major. So this is the story. Can I tell you the story what happened in the sighting? Because and also just to position it, my hometown Lublin, where Iwonka and I used to live, then there is Emilcin, which is a small village, kind of small town at this stage. And then Iwonka's family that, she was visiting was in between, so she was even closer, right? Because she was visiting a family in the countryside. So what happened in Emilcin, I think it was 10th of May, 1978. So Polish farmer, in early morning hours, was leaving his house leaving his farm in a horse-drawn carriage. Something that I remember my grandfather had, and so on. Right, horse-drawn carriage, to go to the fields. And it's a very sweet story because, we were completely isolated. So we didn't see any foreigners, we never heard about UFOs, and especially not in a small town. And he was suddenly stopped by two small men. And at first I thought that they were foreigners because their eyes were slanted this way because he has never seen a foreigner, okay? But then I was a little bit surprised because they had a slightly gray, greenish face, and they spoke in a language that I'm pretty sure was not spoken anywhere else. And they basically sat on the cart with him, and then they took him he saw a spaceship hovering about 5 meters above the ground. And they took him to the spaceship, and he describes the inside of the spaceship. There was some kind of gray machinery, but it was like just one box. And then some other elements there that I describe in my book. And then he was medically inspected by them. He didn't say where or how, but they said they had like kind of elongated but egg-like tools. But they were not mean to him. And even when they first gestured for him to undress, which he did, they inspected him, then they gestured that he can put back on his clothes. And they even offered him some kind of nourishment. And he said it looks like kind of icicles, gray icicles, and he declined. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then on some kind of platform, they lowered him down. And then he went back to his cart, horse-drawn cart, and he basically drove back home. He told his family, his neighbors, and his sons. Everybody in the village immediately went back to the space, and the spaceship was gone. But there was like what we would now call, but he wouldn't because he never heard about it, crop circus, kind of like like the grass was bent, right? The grass was bent there. And there were footsteps apparently leading in all different directions, footsteps on the grass.
Wow.
So they later checked, and a boy in a nearby village at the same time saw a spaceship hovering above his parents' barn, but it didn't land. It just kind of hovered and moved away quickly. So fortunately, nobody made fun of him, and nobody called it a swamp gas, In fact, there's a little monument erected there in Emilcin that says this is where UFO landed on May 10th, 1978. His name was Jan Wolski, the Polish farmer, Jan Wolski. And I would translate it from Polish. Truth always amazes us. I think it's so beautiful.
I love that.
Rather than debunking it. And what really touched me about this story, it is that I wrote, this anecdote about my friend just to start up my book, because it's a new topic for me, something personal. Then I hear this voice in my head, check, maybe there was a sighting, maybe she was not deluded. And guess what? 20 miles away from where we lived, there was a major UFO sighting and an abduction site in Emilcin, which was a small village there. Now it's probably a small town, right?
Oh, wow. I'm definitely interested in this book you're working on.
And it says, even if you Google, it's number 8 after Rodwell. Rodwell is one. So it's just that it's kind of a new part of the world for people to explore, right? Because everybody knows, United States, Brazil is big, right? In UFO sightings. And it happened during communist times, and we're completely isolated. So what gives credibility also to Jan Wolski, this Polish farmer, that I'm telling you because I had family living in the countryside There's no way they even heard about UFO. There's no way that they heard about Star Wars, you know. There's no way that the media could, that was completely controlled by the government and it was all about, you know, the party and so on, he couldn't possibly hear about it in any way. You know, Rodwell, he never heard about it. Even I didn't hear about it until I moved to the West, and, you know, not even then when I lived in Canada, because in academic circles it was not spoken about. So I think the story is completely credible, and I can't believe that it happened like less than 20 miles away from where we lived when I was a little girl, and my friend probably spotted it twice when going back from a countryside with her family in her father's car.
Wow,
That's
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Did that by chance bring up any sort of memories that you might have had? Like, did you perhaps see it as well, or was it just interesting to hear about?
No. So now I can cover now. As I said, I didn't. It was just interesting that but I had some experiences, like, and I can share them. Okay. So I'll start from Lublin, but it's few years later already. So not when my friend saw it. I was experiencing a very strong anxiety or fear that I may have to go to a hospital and be with the doctors. Okay. And it was so intense. I was in my room, in the same room, and suddenly, and this is 100% not imagination, a portal opens up in my room, which is like white portal, like light portal, and I hear this telepathic voice telling me, do not be afraid. Okay. And then what happened, it is that my anxiety, my fear went away like that. The voice said it, and I was not afraid anymore. You know, this fear that I had of doctors and hospitals, for that moment, because this fear continues, which I will explain later, went away. I was suddenly very calm, and I had a sense that it was a good presence. So in my mental lexicon at that time, I thought it was an angelic presence. Although I didn't see an angel, it didn't have wings, you know, whatever they represented. It was just a portal open right in front of me, portal of light. And I got up from my chair and I went to my mother and told her what happened. And my mother probably like, whatever, right? I'm glad you're not anxious anymore. Right? But that was interesting, you know. Then, many years later, I'm in Melbourne and I just came back from Jerusalem. I went on a pilgrimage in Jerusalem. And I am having this lucid dream the same way that, you know, with a shadow, because it's in the same room that went to the old man. Mm-hmm. Because I am not really sleeping. I am in this room. I am, in this bed, right? So lucid dream. And I don't know how it is possible, because at the back of my head, because they're behind me at the, head of the bed, there are two beings that I could call two beings of light, but they're kind of goldish light, but I can actually see them elongated, much taller than human beings, and long legs and long hands and very thin, okay? And they communicate something to me, and all I know that it is important, but I don't know what it is. Okay, all I know that it is important. They communicate with me through symbols that look a little bit like Egyptian hieroglyphics, but they're more like mathematical symbols. Mm-hmm. And they just put it into my head, and all I know that it is very important, and I'm not scared, and I don't know how I see them because they're behind my head. I'm lying down, but I still see them. And I still see them, like this kind of elongated being surrounded by light, but it was a kind of goldish light. And what struck me about it is that it was like hieroglyphic / some mathematical symbols, something in between of that was communicating. There are two of them with me. Wow. So that was another one. And the most recent one which and for this, because this was 100%, like I don't know if it was UFO, what it was angelic, that was something, okay? And this one, and I want to actually know your opinion and your listeners and viewers' opinion on this, because I'm not claiming it was, the next one, but it looks like it to me, but maybe, it isn't. So by that time, I lived with my husband in Mount Martha on the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. So Rev Stu would know where it is. Mm-hmm. I wake up from something that I know that I was in the middle of something, okay? And I woke up and I was not supposed to wake up. But I turn on a side and I look at the clock. It's 2:30 a.m. And I thought, oh, I'm supposed to go back there. This is just the thought. And suddenly, I am sitting on a chair, okay, feeling unusually happy, like I'm doped, okay, feeling unusually like la, 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 happy, like, when you have anesthetic or something. And I can see just my hands and the rest of my body. I'm sitting on some kind of dentist-like chair. And I don't see I just see my hands, but I don't see my legs or anything. So I don't know, because it's like a white light there. I cannot see what's going on there, the rest of my body. And I'm unusually happy. And all I see is like several men in this room that looks like some kind of laboratory in white, like lab suits, right? All of them are facing, their backs to me. And I have a thought. First thought is they are deceiving me, but I'm still very happy, kind of, la, la, la. They are deceiving me. And when one of them is turning around, and he's very handsome and very charming, and he says, no, we are not deceiving you. Everything is okay, in a very kind of soothing way, okay? And then he turns his back to me again. And then I have another thought. Why all of them look the same? They're like clones, like, are they holographs or something? And then I have another thought, and it's hilarious. So, your audience will laugh. I wrote this example actually to Diana Pasuka. And I had a thought, they know I like charming men. That's why they presented themselves like that to me, but they're actually deceiving me. Okay? And then the man, turns to me again, because he was doing something it was like a lab, okay? Like a medical lab. And he looked at me and I hear this voice in my head. She knows, out. And I, woke up in my bed, but like, boom, like I fell on my bed. And I look at the clock, it's 2:30 a.m. And my first thought is, because I didn't even realize what happened yet, how could it be 2:30 a.m. again, since I've been with the doctors up there? And then I thought like, oh my goodness, what's going on? Wow. So I don't know. What do you think?
I think they were trying to assess your level of consciousness and whether you could see through the deception. So in a sense, it feels like a bit of a test or an initiatory process.
It was very strange, and it was only like about 7-8 years ago. So I don't know if it's a memory of abduction or is it but it felt really, and this is what I told Diana Pasuka, it wasn't like material, like I didn't see a spaceship and, I don't, but it was completely real. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, I have lots of dreams and I know what dreams are like. This was completely real. And there was the sense when I just kind of was thrown back into my bed, so to speak.
Now, you said something like you didn't necessarily feel fear, did you?
No, I didn't. But I also had a sense that I was doped. I was feeling like, oh, this is really weird. You know what I mean? Like, why am I so happy? I'm in this lab and I am afraid of doctors, which I have a long, long fear of doctors, which I want to discuss in a moment if you have a time,
Wow.
Because in relationship to this. And here I am, like a happy camper, like completely, well, whatever they do to my body, I cannot actually see the rest of my body. I just can see my hands. Everything is like blurred around me. And I have no problem with it. And when I think, and the only underlying thought is they are deceiving me. They just pretend to be these good-looking doctors that, but they're actually deceiving me, and this is when they cut me out, right? Like they, and I was back in my bed, also 2:30 a.m., So if it was something, it was a loss of time, but not really, because I just, something was happening and I'm back and it's still the same time. And then, so what do you think? You think
yeah, that's... I just wanted, I guess, clarification of you were in bed and you woke up and looked at the clock and it was 2:30, and then I guess, I don't know, I don't want to like put words in your mouth or anything, but I guess you like closed your eyes, went back to sleep, and then you had this whole thing happen.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Then you went back, and then it was 2:30 again, essentially, or?
Yeah, yes, it was 2:30 a.m. And my first thought was, when I was back, was, how could it be 2:30 again when I was with the doctors all of this time up there? That was my thought, my thought. And then when I realized, what?
Wow.
So that was the experience. So if you have the time, I maybe elaborate a little bit, because
please.
Recently I bought a book by John Mark, Abductions, right? And it was funny because such a famous book, and I couldn't get it at the Library of University of Queensland, which is a major university in Australia, no state library. I had to buy it because it's not available anywhere, which is, I think, is really sad, because it's a classic book, John Mark, Abductions. And then, I'm reading this because research for my book, nothing personal, right? I'm reading this and he says, another thing that is common for abductees, that they have a lifelong fear of doctors.
Uh-huh.
And I think like, ooh, because I actually have seen psychoanalysts, psychologists. My underlying thought is always, you can't trust them. And it's like paranoid thought. You can't trust them. However, if you don't mind, I'll tell you another strange story that could explain it, but it's strange in itself. So, because I want to be honest, I don't want to claim it's abduction if it was maybe some other scar from childhood. When I was 6 years old, it's communist Poland again, I'm taken to a hospital to remove my third tonsil because I was getting sick all the time because it was, additional tonsil in my mouth. But strangely enough, they kept me there for 7 days. And my parents were not allowed to visit me. This can be confirmed by my mother, okay? And when I was in this hospital, and they did remove a third tonsil, right? I was in a hospital one day, I was with other children, it was hospital for children, I presume, because I was in this room with other children in beds, white beds and everything. And I had to go to the toilet. And when I went back to the toilet, I got lost. And I went to the wrong wing of the hospital because as a child, I got lost. And I opened a door to this other room, and it was full of terribly disfigured children lying in beds, but horrific. Like one had an ear big like that, like 2-3 times bigger than his head, terribly disfigured children. And there was this kind of atmosphere of despondency, like these children knew that they're abandoned, or you know what I mean? I'm just, as a child, I was just processing the feelings. I couldn't understand what happened there, right? It was a horrible atmosphere, and they knew that I wasn't supposed to be there, and they just were surprised to see me. And there was this horrible atmosphere of despondency, terribly disfigured. And I froze because it was horrific, okay? It was horrific, like something like you would see in a lab, some horrible experiments. But perhaps they were born like that, so that's why I don't know. Until a nurse came, opened the door, because the door was locked from the inside. So you could get from the outside, but you couldn't get, not like in my room. You understand? Like they couldn't get out. And she just, a nurse dressed in white, took my hand and says, "You're not supposed to be here," and took me to the other children, normal wing. So recently I was discussing it with psychologists because of my paranoid fear of doctors. And she says, oh, she was horrified to hear this. And then she said, oh, maybe because it was in Eastern Poland, maybe it was some kind of post-nuclear, disease
Exposure,
or whatever,
yeah.
exposure. And I said, yes, but it was years before Chernobyl. You know Chernobyl, when it happened.
Oh,
it was
yeah.
years before that. And then also one of my cousins took care of the children from Chernobyl for one summer to help them to recover, right? So they have no hair, and they had some other, symptoms, but none of them look like that. That was like a horror on wheels, what I saw in this room. So I don't know, maybe it is a reason why I'm afraid of doctors. Maybe it is an abduction, but this incident by itself is really strange, right? Like,
Very.
what was that? And one more thing about John Mack, when I was reading it, he says another thing about abductees is that it usually happens from early childhood on, right? And he says very often people have strange like incisions or scratches or bruises on their bodies. Until my early 40s, I was waking up pretty much almost every night with not incisions, but scratches and bruises all over my body that I couldn't, like at my back and stuff, that I couldn't explain. Even my mother, when I was a child, used to joke, whom did you fight all night? You know? So this is my story. So I really don't know. And I'm just kind of putting it together. And John Mack, I'm not being, influenced by him, because he's just very systematic about it. And I thought, I had this experience and this and this. Also, very often, it stopped a few years ago, I had a sense of, that I was levitating, but not out of the house or anything, but kind of when I sleep, I had a sense that I was going somewhere. And then, and also when I was coming back, had the same kind of bouncing back on bed, But I would lie if I say I saw grace or, or I saw a spaceship. So that's my story. And I guess it's open for interpretation, what it really was.
Okay, now for our audience, the gentleman that Dr. Joanna was referring to was Dr. John E. Mack, who was head of psychiatry at Harvard University. I wanted to ask you, was that an inordinate amount of time that they kept you in the hospital? And did they perhaps find something during that operation?
I don't know. It was normally, it's a day thing, tonsil thing, because it's a procedure. But, it was communist time. So who knows, they just did whatever they wanted, and I don't think it was unusual for my parents not to be able to visit me, because no parents were able to. We were not allowed any visitors, they had very little regard for, psychological well-being of children. And when I was in hospitals, I went through all kinds of blood tests. Everybody did, because I remember like in rows going, other children, they took lots of tests on all of us, and eventually I had tonsils removed. And for some reason, it was took a week. So I never questioned that, because it's just communist times, nothing makes sense. Okay, but there was this strange event with this horribly disfigured children, and I'm saying it in a good faith, like if what I experienced before in Mount Martha, many years after actually, but I described before, was not an abduction, maybe my fear of doctors was influenced by what I experienced in the hospital, right? Although I never experienced anything wrong with the real doctors. I just saw children, there that were terribly disfigured. So I'm not sure. And I also was seeing psychoanalysts and psychologists for a long time, now and on and off, about this fear of doctors, and nothing was ever resolved. Let's put it this way. Not even remembering, because I always remembered the story about hospital, but it didn't bring me any resolution. The fear is on, so to speak, right?
Well, I find it interesting that when you had the encounter with the portal, it allayed your anxiety for that time.
Yeah.
And then subsequently the incident in Mount Martha, you had a calm attitude about that too. So maybe something was trying to assist you and guide you and calm you down in both instances.
perhaps. And I said like this, even if it was an abduction in Mount Martha, if it were, I don't know, it was not an unpleasant thing, because whatever it was, I was unusually happy. I think it was made sure that I'm not stressed. So somebody took care of me in this sense. They just didn't want me to know or remember, but I somehow saw through this, I felt the deception, right? And then they decided, okay, she knows. Basically, the last thought in my head is his voice, she knows. And I'm back in my bed.
Wow.
So I have a couple questions, and we can take this out, after the fact if you want. But have you ever heard of something called screen memories?
Heard, but I'm not very familiar with this.
So with what you're describing with the doctors standing around you, but their backs were facing you and they all looked the same. To me, that sounds like what we would call a screen memory of, I don't know how to properly say it without, let's see. So, for example, at one point I thought you were going to say something, but it didn't come out. And it's not that I knew what you were going to say, but I just, anyway, how tall were these doctors? Let me ask that first. Do you remember how tall they were?
I don't know, because it's difficult. I don't know. I think that probably human-sized man, but I was on some kind of dentist-like chair, slightly elevated, right? So and everything was around me was blurred. All I could see my hands. So I really don't know, but there are lots of them, and it was like a lab. Okay, it was a lab. I cannot describe it as inside of a spaceship, like Jan Wolski, for example. He saw it was a spaceship, right? Even inside, it looked like it looked like a lab. It looked like a lab. I don't know, but everything was kind of, the edges were blurred. Like it was like I had a blurred. I could see clearly, but the edges of it were blurred, almost like in a kind of circular way. So it's difficult for me to judge, really. Because what was going on, it was, what was going on really in my head, and observation and sensing the deception. And they tried me to convince me very sweetly, they went into lots of effort to make themselves attractive, except they all look the same, right? And very sweetly, no, it's okay, there's no deception, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some people might think that you're describing what we briefly talked about in a last episode, actually, was military abductions. But I personally don't believe that those take place. But regardless of whether they do or not, if humans were involved in what you're talking about, I don't think that there would be a telepathic capability for you to have a thought and then for them to answer your thought. And so what I'm getting at here is with the idea of screen memory of, like when you talked about that guy who saw the raccoon that started talking, was it really a raccoon? There's other cases that I'm aware of where people will see, animals and such, and then those animals will morph into what we would call the gray creatures. So I was just wondering if, it sounds to me like that could be something, like if there was, a bunch of gray alien beings around you with this procedure or ritual or whatever it was, and they were sort of projecting into your mind, and as wild as that sounds, that they were these handsome doctors, because that's what you would be calm with.
Yes.
And it would also potentially answer the idea of you're putting a thought and they're turning around and they're answering your thought.
Yes. They were not human, so that's why I don't think it's I have no opinion about military abductions, but I think that it's just trying to hide what was actually going on personally. So I'm skeptical of military abductions. I knew that they are not human. I didn't know what they were, because my first thought was what later Ellen J. Kripal was writing about, this raccoon, that I thought, are they like holographic images, because they're all the same? And I knew that it was like, something is off, but I didn't have a mental ability to, is it a hologram, is it a clone, but it was definitely, I knew it was not human, simply because humans are not looking like all the same, and they don't communicate telepathically with, and they don't get into your head, right? because it was his voice in my head. And I couldn't do anything about it. And I also, in this chair, I couldn't move. And yet I was happy. This is what, when I woke up, was thinking, normally you would be freaked out, right? But I was just like happy, but I couldn't do anything. Like, was completely at my mercy, but not concerned, strangely enough.
I think, I suspect in that liminal space that you spoke about earlier, our minds are trying to interpret energies and communications through a lens that we can understand. And this theme's come up a few times during this discussion. So, Mike, it might not be a screen memory, an implanted image. I feel it's probably our mind, our consciousness trying to interpret the interaction.
Quite possibly, However, I definitely felt that the handsomeness and charming doctors, it was put into my head, like I knew right from the beginning there's a deception there. Yeah.
It's for me the oddly enough, the most interesting part of that was they were all turned with their backs towards you, which is not something that any of us would ever do. And it's almost like something's just a little bit off and a little bit different from what it should be. But
and white lab uniforms,
yeah. I very, very interesting. I don't know if you wanted to keep all that in there. I guess we'll send you the final version, and you can decide if you want to keep it all in there or not. But
I decided to discuss it, and I'm discussing it in my book.
Okay.
So one of the things that I discuss, I have a few more examples in the book, but this is kind of most significant and more recent, that it's closest to what could be called abduction. And I do not claim it is an abduction. I also talk about this example from the hospital, as it could be also, from a psychological point of view, very good explanation for my fear of doctors, although I personally had no bad experience apart, in the liminal space with the doctors of any deception. So I leave it in the open, but was a strange experience. And when I was reading John Mack's book, who is was a professor of psychiatry, something started to come into place as well, right? Like as a child, when I was waking up with scars and the sense of levitation, and maybe I should add one more thing before we go on, because I thought, okay, it happened in Lublin, the scars. And I thought I was an only child, so I was always alone in my room. I lived with my mother. My parents divorced early on. And just what was happening is that my mother had terrible lucid dream sort of nightmares at the time, because she was dreaming that she is in the room in her bed, the same lucid dream. And there was a dark, shadowy figure at the door, and she was waking up herself screaming, trying to ward him off. And her bedroom was next to mine. So I don't know if it is connected or not, but it is all kind of strange, right?
So I did want to ask about that, but I wasn't sure if it would be appropriate. Has your mother ever talked about any other things like that, or?
No, my mother is completely very, very kind of, she's open to everything, but she would say, oh, you're oversensitive, Joanna, right? She would say. However, when this was happening, she for years had this waking up in scream, having the same lucid dream over and over again, this kind of hooded, shadowy figure standing at the door of her bedroom, and she's trying to ward him off through screaming, and this is what actually wakes her up. Right,
So then when that happened, did that sort of correlate with when you woke up with different markings and such? Or
but the different markings happened until my early 40s. It's just stopped quite recently, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So it happened during my childhood, but throughout my life. Yeah.
Interesting.
So perhaps just to close, I would like to say that these are, unusual experiences, and that's why I like to see them as the liminal space, in between, where some of them are actually, in my experience, except for the one in hospital, which was actually material experience, not a liminal experience, they were not negative, they were positive. They were very unusual, but they were positive. There was a light orb telling me, huge portal, actually not an orb, telling me not to be afraid and taking away the fear from me for a while, right? Which came back. Even when I was with the doctors, it was made sure that I was very comfortable, in fact, happy. I'm pretty sure I was duped, right? For this, I was given something. So they are not negative experiences. And I think that we as probably society and civilization should open to this, because I think that this experience is probably not so unusual. People just don't talk about it, don't want to remember them, right? Because they don't want to look weird. And that's why I didn't share this until now either. And we also, with an materialistic paradigm of science that is, we understand science at the moment, have no explanation for it. So in a way, it's like, what's the point, right? Like, yeah. So what, did you see a ghost, or you have a vivid imagination? Unless you get into talking about multidimensionality and so on, then it doesn't make sense. And for me, and I'm no expert, I'm just writing a book on this to figure out things for myself in my own experiences, and I do, for research, because I'm an academic. But for me, it looks more like a multidimensional experience, right? Rather than specific spaceship, taking you somewhere. Having said so, I also believe that people do see spaceships, and there are some mechanical elements to this, quite likely. But in my case, because I have no problem with this, but in my case, I think the encounters were more of a multidimensional type, right? The portal. I had one more experience, but I probably won't bore you with this. But this kind of things that basically make me feel that it has to do more with liminal spaces, or what is called the third space, that are completely real, because they feel actually more real than real. They are not like regular dreams. They are not just nightmares. However, we don't have a vocabulary to describe it. And this is the main problem. And I think otherwise, lots of people experience it all the time. But most people probably block it off or just don't talk about it.
Yeah, well, as Christians, and there's the Transfiguration account in the Bible where Jesus' body turns to light, and he's communing with Moses and Elijah. A couple of the apostles witnessed that. So, it's not so strange. Like if you're a Christian, those things are right there, and those kind of accounts are right there in your Bible.
That's right. And actually, there are people like Paul Anthony Wallace, who is actually in Australia, who talks about it. He's a fantastic man. But also, it is very common in Hinduism as well. So the accounts of Hindu gods, even greatest gurus like Sadhguru, who is the biggest Indian living guru at the moment in India, he basically gives an accounts of Shiva showing up on planet Earth 15,000 years ago in Tibet and taking up on a human body. And he actually describes himself as one of the celestial beings called Ganas. And there's a whole taxonomy of different celestial beings in Hinduism, and he's one of the Ganas, right? The same Lord Ganapati, which is like Ganesh, which is the one with elephant head, he says it's a misunderstanding because of some, and I can explain this a misunderstanding, because Ganapati is very similar to Gajapati, which means the Lord of elephants, when in fact Ganapati, which is Ganesh, is called the Lord of the Ganas. So he's like a next in line to Shiva as a Gana, as the celestial being. And then apparently they arrived only 15,000 years ago. Okay. And in this place of arrival, this particular lake in Tibet, and also monk Kailash, when Shiva apparently abides, some people believe, there are lots of sightings. So these things are related, and I think we cannot even speak about spirituality without looking into the unusual, the transpersonal, the third space, right? Because this is what spiritual experiences are, and it just depends how we perceive them, in a mechanical sense or in multidimensional sense or in a spiritual sense.
Speaking of Tibet, I read in Alexandra David Neal's work, I don't know if you're familiar with her, about going to Tibet, and she stayed with the lamas up there, and they collectively created a tulpa, which manifested in front of them through their thoughts. They created
Yes.
a being, and she says it was friendly at first, and then it took on a bit of a dark energy, and then they had to collectively dissolve it. Now, I find that fascinating because that's thought manifesting in a physical, tangible, visible form.
Yeah, so this is actually, I remember the story. I don't remember the author, but I remember the story. So this is really a story of creating an egregore, right? So through your mental abilities, we can create it. So these things happen, right? So these things happen, and I think they all relate to consciousness, and we perceive everything around us through consciousness. So in a way, it depends on the openness and the level of consciousness, because all esoteric sources of all religions speak about different levels of consciousness, and the lowest one is the material one, right? So, and the whole science, the whole modern science is based on the lowest level of consciousness. Everything is physical, which is actually in spiritual traditions around the world, it is called wrong identification. Believing that only matter is real.
Wow. Now, the power of our manifestation, from what I've learned from my journey, is achieved through focused attention and emotion. So if you have, as you've described, a fear of doctors, that's a strong emotion, and a focus. So I believe it's going to manifest something unusual in your life.
That's possible, but I think that the fear is a result of something.
I certainly don't mean the fear is unfounded, but I just mean it's a powerful catalyst.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's funny that the fear is present only in my mundane life. It is not present when I'm actually somewhere. You understand? Like when I was with the doctors, I was not afraid of them.
Interesting.
Yeah, like the doctors, I was just like, actually, it was really strange. I was just like sitting there happily, despite the fact that I had no control over what they were doing to me. But when I am here, back here, this is when my underlying thought about doctors is, do not trust them. They are deceiving you, So, but not when strange things happen. When every time something strange happened, it was actually a positive experience.
Wow.
Well, there's certainly no clear lines to any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think a good example of that would be just to sort of tie in a couple of our other previous episodes where we had one former radar expert for the military track physical objects on radar, and then a couple episodes later we had a first responder and Coast Guard who saw something in the sky that did not show up on the radar. And I think that's pretty interesting, where the radar was involved in both cases, and one time it was able to be detected, and the other time it was not. Sort of going back to the question of, is it physical or is it not,
I do feel like it is a multidimensional phenomenon, primarily, and it also depends on the level of consciousness of the observer, right? If you do not believe that this is possible, then it is not going to happen to you because it's beyond your field of perception. I'll just give you one example that I described actually in my book. So, some years ago, my mother and her sister, my aunt, came to visit us in Mount Martha, Victoria, Australia. And we have very kind of colorful parrots there, which are rosellas and lorikeets, very colorful, beautiful parrots. And they were in our garden, and I was trying to show them to my mother and my aunt, and they couldn't see them because they have never seen them before. It's very interesting. I made a note of this until I said, look at this branch of this tree. And they said, yeah. Now move a little bit to the right, your vision, and then you see blue and red bird, and this is a rosella. And only then they saw it.
Wow.
So, and then I thought, isn't it a philosopher, right? You have to know, you have to believe in this possibility, and you have to be shown to see it. Because I saw it and I said, it's there, don't you see it's a rosella? And then here's a lorikeet, it's slightly different colors. And they said, where? You know, and it wasn't a problem of eyesight, but because they have never seen it before, they couldn't see it until I said, like, you know, with clear instructions. And I think that it could be the same about our perceptions of transpersonal or ET experiences or UFO, UAPs. It is how open you are. And if you've seen it once, you can see it again, because your field of perception has opened. So once I showed the two parrots to my mother and my aunt, then they saw them, you know, later. I didn't have to show them. I said, oh, look, lorikeets came back to the garden. But before, they were all around and they couldn't see them.
Okay,
because they didn't know they existed.
Now,
I thought, like, I have to make a mental note of this, you know?
Now, this is really interesting what you're talking about now, because it's talking about how our consciousness is expanded by these interactions. And I wonder if that's what's going on here. Now, my daughter's watched an animated movie called Rapunzel. And in that film, in that presentation, Rapunzel doesn't know who her parents are. And every time Rapunzel's birthday comes around, the parents send up a multitude of lanterns floating in the sky, glowing orbs, glowing lights that are supposed to remember of her true origin and her true family.
Wow.
It's a very beautiful motif.
Very beautiful motif. And also maybe in these folk tales, and this is what Jacques Vallée writes about and others, you know, there is some truth. There is a truth in a kind of put in a mythological or legendary way about that, like what Hildegard of Bingen said, the 12th century female mystic. She said, like, we're part of a cosmic family, you know, this is a cosmic song of creation, all the creatures, and we are not the only ones. So this was, and it was always with us. You know, it was always with us. That's why Jacques Vallée went into so much trouble, you know, a Passport to Mongolia. And he said everybody hated him for this book because UFO people thought like he's just going to fantasy instead of, you know, engineering, and other people thought he's already, you know, went off, right, on the wrong path. So, but it is a very important work because of that. Because it is telling us that we are part of a larger family. And also, more interestingly, perhaps we can finish on this note, Jeff Kripal says about one experiencer who basically, this is his conclusion as well, he says that what we perceive, it could be a grander vision of ourselves. You know, but we are just like projected into this reality, in a material reality, but there is a much bigger part of ourselves, consciousness-wise, right? And sometimes we have glimpses of this grander part of ourselves as the other. So it's a projection, right? So because it's trying to communicate with us, right? Because now our brain is a limited receptor, right? So it's trying to communicate with us in ways, as Hildegard also said, that make sense to us. So possibilities are limitless, but I all the time come back to the same point that I think it is a multidimensional event, because it is somehow happens in this liminal space or imaginal space, but imaginal has nothing to do with imagination. Because, for example, in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is a Gnostic gospel that was not included in the Bible, Jesus gives teachings to Mary Magdalene after his death or after his resurrection in the nous, which is exactly the liminal space, which is the space between our consciousness and divine consciousness. So it's a little bit like a hook between these two forms of consciousness. And he says, you are blessed because you are not afraid to see me here.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Okay, so this is also in many esoteric sources, which is actually my specialty. And I admit that I see UFO experiences through this way, because I'm interested really in spirituality and esoterica. But I also had anomalous experiences that after reading Diana Spasuka's books, I could say, yes, that could be also what people call UFO experiences. But it is in this space, and the other apostles, who are there, they are annoyed because they cannot see him, and she can see him, because probably they cannot allow themselves to open up to the space, what is called, in Gnostic Gospels, nous, this liminal space. So it's not necessarily that, and it also, when I was a Catholic, it also bothered me, like that they saw Jesus after death, but they couldn't recognize him. And in materialistic terms, you feel like after resurrection, what's wrong with you guys? Are you blind, or it was not Jesus? But if it was a liminal space, he would show up differently as a light of being, or, you just feel his presence, right? You'd feel his presence. He wouldn't be made of body, he would probably come as a being of light, or in another form you just recognize him, energetically, so to speak, and then it makes perfect sense. Otherwise, if you read it from a materialistic point of view, if you read the Bible from a materialistic point of view, the whole thing doesn't make sense, and it feels like they just actually made it up, right? But now I believe they didn't make it up. And also, in the Bible, since we're talking also about Christianity, when Mary Magdalene is the first one to see him resurrected, and she also confuses him with a gardener. She thought he's a gardener, and he stands with the back to her, and she says, teacher, right? Teacher, is it you? And he turns to her, and she extends her hand to him, and in Greek, which in original Greek, when it was written, says memo aptu, says, do not hold on to me because I have not ascended yet. And he was in some different form, in different, more fragile form, but not yet fully ascended. So whatever that means, not completely light yet. So he didn't want her, do not touch me because you're a horrible woman. It was, do not hold on to me because I'm still in the process of basically some form of transfiguration. Right? So we are again talking about this liminal space, that the spiritual sources in all religious traditions that were pushed into the margins because they didn't fit into very, very basic understanding of what religion is and spiritual experience is, teach us the same thing that I think lots of UFO experiences experience. And also, one more thing from John Mack, the psychiatrist from Harvard, he said that the experience, who said they stopped resisting the process, they stopped being fearful, and the experience were not traumatic anymore. So it is also a resistance to it, and mind you, it is traumatic. It is traumatic if you're being levitated from your bedroom to a spaceship and they do something to you. I'm sorry, it is traumatic, right? And in some cases, people believe that the eggs were harvested, or the sperm was harvested, and there are some experimentations. That is traumatic. But they said if you go with it, you actually see the purpose behind it, and you understand that they're trying to do something that is not, it's not evil. They're trying to do something good. They're trying to create some species, or whatever they're trying to do. You suddenly, once you drop the resistance, it's not such a negative experience, and many of them come back with some sort of gifts, like heightened intuition, clairvoyance. Some of them are also healed from different diseases. So there is some reciprocity.
Very interesting.
Indeed, yeah. So I want to, we're sort of getting near our stopping point here, but just to sort of wrap everything up in a way, go back to the beginning. With you being a PhD who specializes in spirituality and such, I think this is a great question. There seems to be a perception or perceived fear that official UAP disclosure could negatively impact some or all of the modern day religious belief systems. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that idea of if let's say the United Nations comes out like tomorrow and says UFOs or UAPs are real, aliens exist, are all the religions of the world just gonna implode?
I don't think so, but it's an excellent question. But general answer is it depends. Okay, so I personally think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing, but it depends, because if your part of your belief is very dogmatic and you think, you're fundamentalist, then it is going to affect you, because you say, what do you mean? Like, so the angels I saw, like, what were some aliens, like it will be traumatic. But if you're open-minded, as esoteric sources teach us, and you kind of work through meditation and other practices to heighten your sense of consciousness, up your level of consciousness, then why is it wrong? Like I do believe that we are children of a universe, where Hildegard of Bingen in the 12th century said, and we have to integrate it into our belief system, except that there is one warning, that lots of people, and this is why I also, in the same book, I also write about artificial intelligence, lots of people on this planet, especially religious people, believe in the concept of worship, that we are slaves, that we are not worthy. And this is what actually drove me away from, traditional Christianity, although I would consider myself like a Christ follower, but, not the traditional one. And then this beings of higher technology, or maybe more evolved in their consciousness on some levels, right? Not in everything, because if we were completely boring to them, they wouldn't be coming here. They wouldn't be cloning people and so on. And if people start worshiping them, like some people already are starting artificial intelligence churches, believe it or not.
Wow.
Then that's a wrong thing. Then it's a wrong thing. But if you're open-minded and you say, we are autonomous beings, perfectly capable of spiritual experiences outside, I'm welcoming you as a brother and a sister from different dimension, from a different planet. Let's work together. That's beautiful. I don't see how Christianity, Hinduism, the two religions that I'm close to, they are just brothers and sisters, right? Why should we be afraid of them? Why should it affect us in any way? But if people start worshiping them, then that's an evil agenda, and I think something is going on, there. As I said, there are some puppets going on, and some maybe demonic forces are somehow involved in this. However, Daniel Sheehan, of course, I heard about him, the lawyer, constitutional lawyer, American lawyer, who actually made sure that John Mack didn't lose his job at Harvard because he represented him, right? Because they nearly fired him for writing the book on abductions. He, works for Jesuits who have a fantastic observatory and so on. And together with the Vatican, he was asked to create a protocol for extraterrestrial diplomatic relations. So they know, they know. And, they wanted like an ethical protocol, like how do we greet them? What do we tell them? How do we behave? Welcome them as brothers and sisters. So they have a protocol that Daniel Sheehan prepared for them. He said it himself. It's not some kind of hearsay, right? So both Jesuits and Vatican asked him to create this extraterrestrial protocol, right? So, and the Catholic Church itself several years ago said, we're open to this idea. We have no problem, because we know for a long time, we have no problem. But then it suddenly went quiet. So somebody must have said, oh, no, too early, or we are not happy about it, or whatever. but it suddenly went quiet. And Paul Wallace, in one of his interviews, he said he was trying to find the articles, which I also saw in press, about this press release that the Vatican says that, they are happy with the whole thing. They come, we welcome them as brothers and sisters, and it's very difficult to find them now. Like somebody just says, too early. So the answer is no. I think it's a good thing. I have no problem with it. But people who are bent on, like, I'm a sinner, I need to worship something better than myself, that could be a dangerous precedent, and maybe what some of these powers are counting on.
Interesting.
Wow, fascinating point.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the entire conversation, especially your sharing your own personal experiences. And for the first time here, I really am honored to hear that and to be a part of it.
Thank you, and thank you for giving me, both of you, thank you for giving me the space and time to actually share this for the first time. And as I said, I'm not making any claims. I leave it open-ended, and I treat it as a transpersonal experience, and whatever it was, it's really for anyone to determine, right?
That's great. It's a great I don't know if it's the right word, but attitude about it too, because a lot of times it's hard to make heads or tails of what it is or what it was.
And I think we have to avoid being dogmatic. Like, even if I do personally believe that UFOs exist, that ETs exist, and my experiences were multidimensional, but there are also probably other more kind of nuts and bolts experiences as well. Some of them may be unpleasant for people, but I do believe these things exist. This is just my personal experience, and it's good to be open, because then because I want to think about us as truth seekers, So once we are frozen to one point of view, then we cannot learn the truth.
Very true.
Fantastic.
Wow.
Thank you so much for being with us today. So much love to you, Dr. Joanna.
Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you.
Could
Dr.
you
Joanna.
please
It's a pleasure
tell-
virtually meeting you.
Could you
Pleasure.
please tell our audience where they could find out more about you and your work, please?
Okay. So I have a small YouTube channel, Dr. Joanna Kujawa, Kujawa, as it says here. I have a website, joannakujawa.com. And 2 years ago, I had a book published, which is here, The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddesses of Eros and Secret Knowledge, where I talk about experiences associated with Eros in the first part of the book, and then esoteric writings about Mary Magdalene in parts 2, 3, and 4. So the majority of the book is about Mary Magdalene, but the other perspective. And at the moment, I'm about the midpoint of my next book, and I have a title, but I'm not sharing it yet, which talks about UFOs and artificial intelligence's spiritual experiences. And except with artificial intelligence, I write about it at the end of the book. It will be at the end of the book, because I have very serious concerns about the way it is going at the moment. So I'm much more positive about UFOs than what is possible with artificial intelligence.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Perhaps we can maybe...
Sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I also have a public Facebook page, so Dr. Joanna Kujawa. So please, because I try to post there and I try to stay in touch with people, so you can contact me there as well.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And I think if you're open to it, maybe we can do another one of these at some point soon, because I was hoping to touch upon the topic of AI as well. And, we simply ran out of time at this point.
Yeah.
And I think it would be good to do, and potentially, there might be someone else who I can bring into that conversation as well.
Yeah, that would be really good. Thank you.
Okay, that'd be great.
Thank you. Enjoy your Sunday, gentlemen.
All right.
Thank
too.
you so much
Thanks
for your
again.
time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, Stuart. What do you, well, before I ask you what you have to say, I want to say something. And this is going to sound really corny and cheesy, but I kind of feel like I am personally and potentially spiritually growing right here on this little show that we're doing, because Dr. Joanna really got my brain thinking when she was talking about the space in between, and the multidimensional aspect of all of this.
She's absolutely fantastic at connecting those dots. She comes with a lot of knowledge, and I'm sure you saw that open-hearted candor she brings. I really love and respect. I'm so grateful that she was on the show with us today.
Yeah, so that was really that was amazing, as I thought it would be, but more amazing than I thought it would be. And as true to form, I guess, with all the conversations we've been having, we go to places that I was never expecting.
Well, I'm loving, as I mentioned on another show, how the different guests reference the same people. Some researchers, some academics come up thematically through our show, and it's unscripted. It's just happening. It's just happening organically.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, there's sort of like the who's who of the world that we're talking about, but on the other hand, there's common themes, and this has been studied for decades now, and themes are emerging and percolating throughout the world, and we're just trying to figure out as best we can to make heads or tails of what it is.
I love that she mentioned Daniel Sheehan when she spoke to us, and you'd mentioned on an earlier podcast that you'd been involved in some studies with that gentleman.
Yeah, there was a course that I took an introduction through, and he was there. So I was. It wasn't necessarily live interaction, but it was pretty close to that. And I think what her comment was is potentially new, because I don't remember hearing that specifically, but I've heard him allude to it. And then I think I mentioned previously as well that it wasn't but a couple episodes ago that the Vatican put out a statement about a statement, like, we're getting ready to say something about paranormal stuff. And also we had another guest on, Robert Salas, who mentioned that he had been asked to write a letter to the Pope several years ago, and Robert alluded to the idea that we're going to be sort of confronted with talking with sentient beings from elsewhere, and in his words, an account for ourselves. And I like how he said that, because I think that we do have some accounting to do for ourselves for all this warring and such that we do.
Wow, we're absolutely on topic here with these discussions we're having. I feel thrilled and honored to be on this journey. I know I say it many times, but I'm just absolutely enjoying this exploration with you. Thank you so much for taking me on this journey, Mike.
It's my pleasure, and like I've said before, I can't, I wouldn't want anyone else here with me than you to do it, because I'm having the time of my life here, Stuart, and hopefully lots of people listen, and we're getting more and more subscribers all the time. But nonetheless, this is great. Just to have these one-on-one conversations with some of these folks. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. Love to you, my friend. Until next time.
You too, and we'll see you real soon. Join us next time when we speak with Miss Mary Rodwell, a therapist turned UAP investigator, because so many of her patients started talking about ET.